Hi, my name is Jonathan Hopp, and I'll be your instructor today. We're going to build a planetary dashboard, an app that someone could use to explore the different planets in our solar system. The framework we're going to use is Angular, which is already a pretty popular front-end framework that is built using JavaScript and TypeScript to build, well, single-page applications that are really beautiful. A lot of companies use Angular for their front end, and if you're interested in learning more about it, this tutorial is going to be perfect for you. We're going to cover a lot of the different basic concepts of how to build an Angular app. So what you'll need to do, of course, is learn JavaScript and TypeScript. So if you do not know either of these languages, I have tutorials on both that you can go ahead over there and do some practice, because without knowing TypeScript or JavaScript, this is going to be very, very difficult. All right, let's get into what you need to install. It's not very much you need to install in order to get Angular to go, and I look forward to journeying to the stars with you. To start off with Angular, you're going to need a couple things. Not too difficult. You're going to need Node.js. Node.js is available at nodejs.org. You can use Windows Installer and install the latest version. And then for Angular, once you've got Node installed, you'll be able to use npm, which is the package manager. You'll be able to open up a terminal, okay, like a command prompt. And from there, you'll just do this command npm install -g angular CLI, just like this, npm install -g at angular CLI, and that will install all of the commands that we will be using to work with Angular. All right, so once you've got these things installed and ready to go, then you're ready to start a new Angular app. We're going to use Visual Studio Code in order to do our work in Angular today. It's not by any means the only IDE you can use to work with Angular. However, it is the one that I prefer. All right, so inside of Visual Studio Code, you can, of course, use the terminal and open up a new terminal and be in the command prompt. One common beginner mistake is to forget which thing you're working in. So, for example, if I go here, you'll notice that there's a bunch of different options, including Git, Bash, and PowerShell. I want to be in a command prompt. And then to do a new app, all you have to do, ng, which means we're doing an Angular command, new, and then we're going to call this Planet Dashboard. All right, that's going to be our application Planet Dashboard. Keep in mind, Angular will handle everything else from here. Hit enter and then wait for Angular to set up all your files. It will ask if you want to use Angular routing. We'll go ahead and just say yes. Regular CSS is fine. Okay, just hit enter, and then it will start creating all of your files in the folder to put them in. It will take a second to, of course, install, so just be patient. Going into the folder, just so you know that Angular will create the folder, so you do not have to actually create your own folder first. Just keep in mind Angular will make one for you. It will come with a lot of stuff out the gate. It has the TypeScript compiler. If you're not familiar with TypeScript, you will, of course, need to review it. I have a great tutorial on TypeScript, TypeScript in 1 hour. That way you can get all the basics. So in the main folder here is a source folder. This is where we're going to be doing most of our work. Right? Everything else you don't really need to touch as a beginner with Angular. It's just a bunch of packages and setup things, and then inside the source folder, we're mainly going to be working inside this app folder, where our components are going to be built and most of our application is going to be. Everything else is essentially what Angular uses to handle styling, handle the components, handle different assets, like static assets, like pictures, for example, that we're going to be putting in here. But again, the main course is going to be inside this application folder, this app folder, where we're going to put our components. All right, so this is all you need to do to get set up with a brand new Angular project. Let's dive in and actually create our first component. Let's take a little tour of what Angular has to offer us right out the box. So notice that we have this app folder where we have a CSS and HTML and a TS file and also the spec.ts. So what these 4 files are doing is they're essentially the boilerplate that we get when making a component. Angular is component-based, meaning that instead of building one gigantic HTML blob for our entire website, instead you're going to break up your website into smaller components, each with their own individual responsibility. These components can be reused, so you can take one component and use it in multiple different views, and it gives us a lot of testability and maintainability with our applications. React also uses a component-based architecture, is the wave of the future. All right, so the HTML file and the CSS, I think, are self-explanatory. The CSS is for styling. The HTML is for displaying the tags to the user. The TS file here is going to be basically acting like a controller. It will be able to call our API layer and basically go get data, and then we will take that data and we will display it to the screen. All right, so let's actually look at what we've got so far. So again, this is just the boilerplate code that came from starting a new Angular application. If you'd like to run your application, the command is ngserve. Okay, it'll take a second. it'll ask you about sharing your stuff with Google, all right, and then it will get going from there. Eventually, it will start up, and your website is now on localhost port 4200. So let's control click here and head over there. And so now you can see that this is the basic Angular. All right, so now you can see that we have localhost 4200 where our app is running. If we control click, it will take us to the Planet Dashboard. Now notice that, of course, we did not do any of this HTML. This is just what comes with Angular when you do a new app. We're going to basically get rid of all this eventually. All right, let's make our first component because, again, the default stuff is cool, but I want to make my own stuff. So I'm going to hit Control-C, and that will stop the server from running. And then we're going to go into the app folder, and I'm going to make a components folder. Now, when you get to your job, if you're an Angular developer, you'll have your own folder structure for what you're doing. But we're going to put all of our components in the component folder. Let's do a couple more folders, too. We're going to have a services folder. All right, that will be holding our services, and we're going to have a models folder, okay, for eventual models. All right, cool. So now we've got a bit of folder structure, okay? And then let's actually think about what we're going to display on the screen. So we're going to have planets, and we're going to have information about each of the individual planets in our solar system. So what we're going to need to do first is we're going to need a model, or basically an interface, that tells us what data we should expect for each individual planet. So we're going to use a thing called Json-Server. Json-Server is a library that allows us to mock the backend, meaning to basically be a pretend API that we can use for data. That way we don't have to go and try to make an API of our own. Remember, Angular is a front-end framework, so it really is more about displaying data rather than it is about storing anything. So this will make it easier for us. So in order to install packages, make sure you're in the folder where your Angular app is, and we're going to do npm I json-server. And we're also going to do concurrently. That way we're able to run the server and Angular at the same time. So let's go ahead and install that. Once that's all installed, make sure you're we're going to make a file, a JSON file that's going to hold all of our planet data. We're going to go ahead and put that inside of the Planet Dashboard folder. So I'm going to do db.json. And again, it could be named whatever.json. And I'm going to put some information about the planets in here. All right, paste it. And essentially what you want is you're going to have a JSON object for the whole thing. And then you're going to have a resource called planets, which will be an array of individual planets. So I just called it planets. I made it an array. And you'll notice that each planet has an ID, a name, the god or that they represent. For example, Mercury is Roman. God of merchants, travelers, and messages. We have a fun fact and an average distance from the sun. Right, just some information about each planet that I might find interesting for us on our journey through the solar system. So I did that for each of the planets of the solar system. I'm sorry, Pluto fans. Pluto did not make the cut. Pluto is a dwarf planet, but it's not quite in with the big boys. Maybe in a few more years, they get more data. We will include it with the rest of the planets, but not today. All right, so we've got our db.json. This will serve as the data that we will use to actually display on the screen. So now we actually need to call this data. Now in Angular, we have this thing called services, which we're going to make in just a moment. And the services job is to basically grab the data from the API. So what Json-Server is going to do for us is it's going to go ahead and make the API for us so we don't have to worry about that. All we have to do is build a service that will call the data and then send the data off on its merry way to our components. So let's handle that part next. One of the cool things about Angular is that it comes with a CLI, which is a command line interface, which allows us to do a lot of the grunt work or things that we would have to do by hand. So for example, I like to make a service. Now a service would involve a lot of typing, a lot of boilerplate code, but we're able to generate a service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my terminal, ng, because it's Angular, it's an Angular command, and we're going to do g for generate. You could write the whole word generate, but I don't really feel like it. So we're just going to do g for generate, and then we're going to do service. And again, you don't have to write the whole word service, you could just write s. And then we're going to put in the services folder, slash, the slash will indicate that it's inside of a folder, and we're going to call this planet service. Now we don't have to actually write the word service here, we can just write planet, and Angular will add the word service after it for us. So keep that in mind so you don't end up with something like planet service service. Alright, we're going to hit enter and we're going to see what happens. After a few seconds, you should see that it's created a service along with a test file. And if we go to our services folder, you'll see it here. All right. And then we've got the basic outline for a service. So what is a service? A surface is essentially a class that's responsible for doing logic outside of the component or the template view. So essentially, typically for services, they're there to call APIs. They do other things like calculations and things, but like 9 times out of 10, your services are there to essentially do the hard work of crunching the data or working with the data so that it can be displayed in your HTML file. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, essentially you'll see that there's not much here, except this part here that says injectable. Right, so Angular has its own dependency injection system, which allows us to decorate or essentially say, cool, we've got this regular plain Jane class. I'm going to go ahead and put this thing on top of it. And that will let the computer know, like, hey, like this class Planet Service is something you can inject inside other places. We're going to use that in a second. All right, but that's what this injectable part means. The rest of it just works like a typical class, so we can do what we want. Right, before we do that, we're going to have to add the HTTP client module. Now, modules are essentially like, I think of them like little libraries, or basically like outside pieces of functionality that we need for our application. And in order for Angular to be made aware that these things exist, we need to put them in the app.module.ts. Let's head over there and let's take a look. So you'll notice that we've got some basic stuff: browser module, app routing module, the app component. So you'll notice that we're going to put, this is basically how Angular knows like the components and modules that you need in order for the application to run properly. So we're going to need the HTTP module because we're going to use that in order to make calls to our API. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do import HTTP client module from, and then Angular has, of course, a whole library of stuff that we can use. If you do @Angular and then do /, you can see there's a ton of stuff here. We want the common, so we're going to do common/HTTP. All right, and that will bring in the HTTP client module. But now we need to actually let it know that, hey, Angular, we have this HTTP client module and we'd like to use it. So in the import section of ng module, we're going to do HTTP client module. All right, and so now Angular will know what the heck this thing is and be able to use it throughout our application. So let's head back over to service, and then here we're going to actually use it. So the cool thing about Angular is it has a dependency injection system, which allows us to basically say, hey, we imported these modules, and now we can use them throughout our application. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and do private. HTTP is the variable. I'm going to say the type is HTTP client, like that. And then, of course, has no idea what this is, so we're going to do quick fix and add the import, all right, the HTTP client from Angular, HTTP. And now we've used the built-in DI container to basically say, hey, we're going to need to have this HTTP client available in order for us to call out to the internet or to our API and get the data that we need. Another little piece of setup is we're going to actually need the base URL that we're going to use to actually call out to. You could put that in here, like, so for example, I could do like const API URL is equal to something. All right, I could do something to that effect, but I'm not going to do that because you shouldn't keep that stuff inside the service. We have actually an environment file that allows us to put different values for different things depending on what environment Angular is running in. You'll notice that there is in the environments folder, so if you open it up, you'll see two. There's prod and the regular one, so we're going to go to environment.ts. There's a bunch of comments here, but we look, export const environment equals, this object is what we're going to add our API URL to. So I'm going to do API URL is equal to HTTP : oops, I'm going to make a string, / localhost port 3000. All right, and that's going to be our base URL for our API. So now I can come back to my service and use that environment variable. So let's go ahead and do private API URL is equal to, and then we'll do $sign backtick, and then and then do environment.API URL, and then we'll do /planets. Right? And notice how it imported that environment file into that module into the service. So now we're able to do environment.API URL. And so now any sort of like endpoints will be inside of an environment environment file, so that in case we're doing different environments, so for example, production, UAT, QA, whatever your company happens to have, they'll all have different API URLs. You're able to keep them all straight, and Angular will be able to use the correct one. All right, so now we've got our API URL, we've got our client. Now we're finally ready to actually make our functions, and we're going to do two functions. One is going to get all the planets, and one's going to get planets by their ID. We're going to need a model to actually go model the plan that we'd like to show. So let's go into models, and we're actually going to go ahead and generate an interface. Actually, sometimes I feel like this is easier done by hand, but I just kind of want to show you that you can do this. We can do ng, g for generate, I for interface, and then we can do models/planet. All right, that will actually make an interface. There we go. We got planet.ts, and inside planet.ts, we can go ahead and put some properties here. So we'll do, each planet has an ID, which is a number, and then the name of the planet, which is a string, the god that the planet is named after is a string, fun fact is also a string, and then we need average distance from sun, which is also a string. All right, so notice that if we go back to our db.json, let me bring that up real quick. Notice how these line up with each of the properties that we have for each planet. So that's what that interface is going to represent. This interface will represent an object that has these properties there for the planet that we get back from our app, from our API. All right, so we've got the interface for the planet. So now after all this setup, you're like, we can finally make our service do something. All right, so let's go ahead and start doing that. All right, so we're going to do get all planets. All right, doesn't take anything in. It will return an array of planets. All right, so here we go. So now we've got get all planets. We'll return an array of planets. And seriously, it's very easy. We're going to return this .http.get because we're doing a get. All right, and then after that, we're going to pass in, we're going to basically tell it what type of data it expects to return and what endpoint should it hit in order to get its data. So in angle brackets, I'm going to basically say planet array because that's the type of data I expect back. And then in the parentheses, the argument it's looking for is the API URL, which tells us like, hey, like this is where you should go in order to get this information. Of course, it has no idea what the planet is, so we're going to go ahead and import that. All right, and so here we go. HTTP returns an observable, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to do observable array of planets. So we'll get into what an observable means. You're probably very like, what the heck is that? An observable allows us basically to use the observer pattern. What that means in simple terms is that this API call, we're going to make it, and then the observable will let us know, hey, your API call is done, here's your data. That way, like, we let it tell us when it's done, because API calls, maybe they take, no time whatsoever. Maybe they take a little bit of time. No matter which scenario we find ourselves in, we're basically going to say, hey, I'd like to make this request. You tell me when you're done. All right, so that was pretty easy, right? So get all planets returns an observable of planet. And again, we're going to go over observable in much more detail once we start using it. And then return this .http, because HTTP is the library that allows us to call out to our API. And then which HTTP verb are you using? Get. What kind of data do you expect to get back? I expect to get back an array of planet. And then what endpoint do you want me to hit? That's the argument for it. So now let's do get planet by ID, which returns an observable of a single planet. All right, because remember this time we want a planet by its ID. Also, we're going to need to know the ID of the planet, so we're going to do ID number, okay, as the actual specifically unique ID of the planet. So here we'll do return this .http.get. We expect a planet back, and then we're going to do backtick, and then we're going to do this .api URL, and then we're going to do slash, and then we're going to have to put that ID in. So let's go ahead and put the ID in. Okay, so $, and then ID, because that ID is the ID of the planet that we're trying to look for. Now you're wondering, like, Jonathan, will Json-Server like can't be able to handle this? And my response is yes. Json-Server is going to make all the REST API stuff. We really do not have to worry about any of that. We just have to put the endpoints in correctly, and it will give us our data. All right, so we have our own service. Yay! It actually will be able to go out, get all the planets, or get a planet by its ID. Now, you're probably saying, well, we haven't actually seen anything on the screen yet. Nope, we haven't gotten to that part yet. Let's get into that part next. Let's actually start building our planetary dashboard by starting working with components. All right, let's work with a component. Let's actually make a component that's going to show all of the planets in our solar system. So to generate a component, you may have already guessed it, but we're going to go ahead and just do it. We're going to do ng, g for generate, c for component, and I already have a components folder, so I'm going to do component slash, and we're just going to call this planet dashboard. Right, and that will generate our files for us. Okay, that happened in no time flat. Now let's go over to our components folder and you will see that there actually is a Planet Dashboard folder, which contains 4 files: the CSS file, the HTML file, the TS file, and then the test file. So we have this spec.ts, which allows us to do tests. Again, we're going to mainly be working with the CSS, HTML, and .ts. The testing is cool. You probably will have to do that at your job, but we're not going to worry too much about it. All right, so we're going to need to actually grab the data from the service. So the service's job is to go to the Json-Server and say, hey, I'm going to call out to localhost 3000 and get my planets. All right, so there has to be, and then once we get the planets from the service, that data, then the data is going to be taken over to the HTML. All right, right now there's nothing really in our HTML. We just have p tags. So how are we going to get the data into the HTML files? So basically, you can think of it as like a template, right? So we have like a template layer, which is going to contain where data should be put. Okay, so like where should data be positioned, how should it be colored, styling, okay, making everything look pretty, right? But the HTML file is not responsible for getting the data, the service is, all right? So there has to be some sort of go-between, something between the template layer, right, and the service layer in order to take to ask the service the right question, get the data, and hand it over to the template. That's what the TS file here is for. So we're going to use this first, right, because it's going to be our connective tissue. And you'll notice that it's got this component at the top, this decorator, and it has a selector, a template URL, and a styles URL. All right, so what this does is basically say, it's already set up for you when you do generate, so you don't have to do this yourself, but I wanted to point this out, that this template URL is, well, this HTML file. So basically it's letting Angular know, hey, this is the HTML file that this data is going to head to, so this is how you're going to do your templating. And the style does the same thing with the CSS file. Here's your style. And then this is how we are able to differentiate this component from other components, which is the selector. Let's take a, Angular is object-oriented, so we're going to have a Planet Dashboard component, which is the class. So our components are objects. And it implements onInit, which I'll get into in a second. And it gives you this onInit, and then a constructor. Right, so what ngOnInit is means, hey, this is what part of the life cycle of a component. Your component will go through many phases as it lives on, as it exists. And so we have certain things we can hook into, say like if we want to do something special at a certain time during the component's life cycle, we can kind of like hook into it and be like, okay, when this happens, I want to do something. ngOnInit is basically saying, hey, when this component starts up, or like when you're starting to spin up this component, I want to do something. So right now there's nothing here, okay, but we're going to actually start, putting some stuff inside of this component so that it actually will do things. Well, the Planet service is something we're definitely going to need, so we're going to use a dependency injection container and put it inside the constructor. So inside the constructor, I'm going to do private, and then we're going to go ahead and do that Planet service. What I mean by that is we're going to take this Planet service class and inject it. So I'm just going to say private service, Planet service. Right, and it'll do the import. I hit tab in VS Code so that it will do the import for me. Otherwise, you can do like control dot. But we'll put the import, so you see how it imports the service into here. And now this service has been injected into the component. So I don't have to actually like worry about how Angular does it. I just need to know that it does it. And the reason that the service is injectable is, remember, we have this decorator here. This is injectable. It's something that can be used in the DI container. So I can, in very, very simple terms, if you don't quite get what that means, I can put it in my constructor as private, and then Angular, like this component, will know that this exists and know how to use it. This dashboard is also supposed to show a list of planets, so we're going to actually make a property of this class. I'm going to basically, the list of planets we're going to get back from the API. And that's real simple. We can just basically say planets, and we'll make it an array of planet. Array has no idea what a planet is, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And we'll add an initializer, basically saying it starts off with no planets, like an empty array. All right, because like right at the very second that the component comes into existence, there won't be any plans because we have to actually call the API. Now, speaking of calling the API, I want to call the API when this component comes into existence. Like when we're starting up this component, that's why I want to call the API, because I need the API's data in order to actually display anything. Well, ngOnInit, this lifecycle part, is really good, right? Because this will run when the component first comes into being. Now, what we're going to do is this dot service. See how that this dot service came up because we injected it here. And now we can do the get all planets because we were able to do that. Now, this is an observable. So now we're going to go more into what observable does. So observables, you subscribe to them. All right, so we're using subscribe function. And what the heck does that mean? I think of observables like newspaper subscriptions, right? So you subscribe to a newspaper and you don't like call the newspaper office every time you want to hear an update, right? You don't like call them and say, hey, is there an update? Hey, is there an update? Hey, is there an update? You don't do that. Essentially what you do is you go about your daily life, and then when the newspaper is ready, they compile all the information and throw the newspaper at your doorstep or ring the bell, and there you go. So essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, like I don't want to just like the API, I want to call the API to give me all the planets. When you're done, I'm going to subscribe to you. I'm going to say basically, hey, when you're done, when you've got news to tell me, then come, we'll do something then. Until then, I don't need to hear from you. Now, inside subscribe, we're going to tell it what to do. So we're saying, okay, cool. Once I hear back from the API, we're going to do data. We're going to use a lambda. So we're going to do data arrow. Okay, this dot planets equals data. All right, and then we're going to put a happy little semicolon at the end. So let's break down line 17. Okay, so first we have the service which we injected in the constructor. We're using our getAllPlanets method that we made earlier. We are subscribing to it because remember, getAllPlanets returns an observable of planets. So right here, observable, basically meaning, hey, like whenever you have an update, let me know. And usually in this case, that means, hey, when you're done calling the API and getting all of your data, let me know. All right, so we subscribe to the observable, we use the subscribe method, and then inside we have this passing in a lambda. So we're saying, okay, cool. Once you come back with some data, take that data and set this dot planets, which means that this is a property of the component, to the data you get back. And the cool thing is that this will run, okay, when the component starts up. Just to prove the point, I'm going to put a little semicolon here, and then we will console.log the data. All right, so that way you can see it when we run it. So now I'm going to, I have autosave on, so I don't need to save anything, but if you do need to save things, you can go to File, Save All. One of the things that people forget is to save. And then we'll do ngServe, and let's take a look. Okay. All right, so I know we won't be able to see it just yet, but I do want to get this open. So we're going to do Control-click localhost port 4200, and notice how we don't see it just yet. You're thinking, well, what the heck? We just went through all that trouble to like grab data, and now we don't see it. Well, this is the default, so we got to basically get rid of the default and put our stuff in. All right, so we're going to have to do a couple things. So first off, let's go over to our root component, which is app.component.html. And we're just going to do Control-A and get rid of all of this boilerplate stuff. Now, here's where we have some fun with components. So now, the components, again, are like sort of like reusable pieces of UI. So essentially, in order to like place a component, we need to do angle brackets, and then we can literally do app Planet Dashboard, and then it looks just like an HTML tag like this, right? So app Planet Dashboard / app Planet Dashboard. Now, why app Planet Dashboard? Because that's our selector. All right, so if we go back to the Planet Dashboard component, you'll notice the selector here is that, so this is the selector. To double check to make certain that it got put in app.module.ts, it should have, but I want to call it out. So see how it says import Planet Dashboard component, and then inside declarations, it's here. All right, so this is how like Angular knows like, hey, this component exists, and I'd like to be able to use it in my application. All right, so just double check to make certain that it made it here. There we go. Let's open it up again. All right, let's say Planet Dashboard works. Let's do F12 to see the console. All right, and in it, we're going to see, oops, localhost 3000 planets. Oh, we got to get Json-Server running. That's all right. We'll get it running, no problem. So let's head back. Let's open up another terminal. We can open up multiple terminals. So I'm going to do terminal, new terminal, and then I'm going to just simply run Json-Server by doing JSON-server 2 hyphens watch db.json, and that will start the server up. Okay, it should say loading gb.json, and then there we go. So let's go ahead back to our Angular app and see if it's picking up the data now. Right, so there we go. We've got, this is the HTML we put in before, and there's nothing we're actually going to see on the web page just yet, but if you look in the console, you can see that we have all of our planets, all right, and their data. So the service is calling the API, which is providing this data. So make sure you understand the flow of how things are working here. So we have the service, right, which we made earlier, which calls the API and gets an observable planet, meaning basically saying, hey, like, I'm gonna give you back some array of planets or a singular planet, all right, but I'll let you know when I'm done. And then the component.ts, okay, is sort of the go-between between the template and the data layer. So essentially, the Planet Dashboard component, a property of this component is that it has an array of planets. We injected this service into the dashboard component, saying, hey, we're gonna need this service. Then we have ngOnInit. ngOnInit is a lifecycle function, which basically says, hey, I'm going to run automatically when this component comes into existence. So if there's anything you want to do, go ahead and put it inside here and I'll run it too. I got you. All right, so then when we did that, we did line 17, this.service.getAllPlanets, and we subscribe to it because getAllPlanets returns an observable. You subscribe to observables. You basically say, hey, go grab the data, and when you're done, let me know. Inside subscribe, we're give it a lambda. This is the function that's going to run when the observable comes back with its data. So we're going to do subscribe data, and then we just basically said, okay, cool. The data this.planets, which is this array of planets on line 12, it's going to be the data that comes back from the API, and we just constant log the data to just to boot, just so you could see something. All right, so that's the data flow. So now the next step is to take this array of planet and actually display it in our template so that we can actually see something. All right, so we're going to do that next. All right, before we move on, I want to make a little small tiny change. Let's go to db.json. I want to add another property basically saying is inner planet. All right, and so for the inner planets, we're going to have true, and for the outer planets, we'll have false. So I'm going to go ahead and update. Right, that means everything up to Mars should be inner as true, and then Jupiter and onward should be false. We're going to use this for a little bit. All right, let's head to our component. Okay, so our component right now just has some plain Jane HTML, and that's fine, but we need to do more than that, right? Because right now, as it stands, we're using the service in our component to basically go to the API and grab a list of planets, and then save it to this planet's variable right here, this property of the component. But we're not actually like displaying anything just yet. All right. So what we want to do is we want to use this HTML, CSS, these two files to make a nice, pretty dashboard with all the planets. The problem is that HTML all by its lonesome is static. What I mean by that is, unless we know exactly how many planets we're going to display, 8, 9, 10, like we know we're going to display 8, but maybe in the future there's exoplanets that we want to add. So if that's the case, then we don't really know how many planets we're going to display. HTML, you have to know up front what you're displaying because the tags are not like dynamically generated. You have to put the tags down. So for example, if I had like a planet, I have to put planet 1 and then planet 2. And if there's a planet 3, I have to come back and update it, and that's kind of a drag. Luckily, Angular has this templating engine. A template basically says, hey, a template is kind of like a fill in the blank, right? So we're going to say for each planet, we're going to have this template. Like for each planet, display this HTML to the screen. That way our view, what we're presenting to the user, is far more dynamic. And so that way it doesn't matter how many planets are in the API. It will be able to handle that and generate the HTML as needed. And Angular is great for that. So let's go ahead and start building in our HTML file. I'm going to do h1 planet dashboard. And again, this part is working like you would work with any other HTML. I'm going to do div class name equals, div class equals, let's do planet dashboard. We're going to add some styling later, so I'm going to make some classes. Right, everything looks normal right now. Div, and here's the part where we use Angular. Star ngFor. Okay, ngFor is a directive. What ngFor does is says, hey, we're about to do Angular. That's why we put a star in front and then ng. It's like, hey, we're about to do Angular. Okay, cool. What do you want to do? I want to loop through something. I want to display HTML for every element in this array. Okay, cool. Well, what array are you talking about? So inside ngFor, we're going to do let planet of planets. And you're wondering, what the heck? This planets is the same as this one here on line 12 inside the component, right? So you can see that the Angular is going to know that, hey, this planet's variable here corresponds to the variable that's inside of the component. So it will loop through, and it will use syntax. So that means that for every planet, this will be the object. Okay, so it will record the planets as it loops through. And now for each of these planets, we're going to do what's inside the div tag. So this div tag is basically a way of saying, hey, whatever you do, like whatever we loop through, inside is what's going to be displayed. And so here we can actually start displaying some stuff about the planet. So for example, let's do an H2. And then to display information about this specific planet, we have this variable planet, but how do we use planet as a variable and like grab the name out of it? Because remember, each planet is going to have a different name. As we loop through them, I want to take whatever the name is of that planet and display it. That's easy. We're going to do two curly sets of curly braces like this, and inside we're going to do planet dot, and then we have name. All right, so planet dot name, perfectly simple. So these two curly braces are basically saying, hey, we're about to put like a variable in here. So we're not doing normal HTML, we're doing Angular stuff. All right, so we have the name of the planet, and then let's go ahead and do planet dot god, and then we can do planet dot fun fact, and planet dot average distance from the sun. And in front of these, I'll put named after just normal HTML, fun fact, and average distance. All right. And so what this means is this part, lines 4 through 9, is I'm saying for every planet in that array of planets that you get back from the API, I would like you to generate this HTML and put it to the screen. Now notice at the bottom, you probably have seen that Angular is like recompiling the front end, so that any change you make, it's going to automatically update, which is a nice quality of life, because I don't want to have to stop and start the server every time I do something new. So let's continue. Now let's look at the fruits of our labor. So if we go back to our website, bam, we have Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter. So we have all the different planets of the solar system. We've got the planet dashboard at the top, and notice that for each one, okay, Angular was able to take the data from each of the objects and put it to the screen. So now you can kind of compare, right? So we can see where we did ngFor, it went through all the planets. So this part is planet.name, then we did planet.god, which is this part, then planet.funfact, and planet.average distance. So we were able to use our template, all right, and it took the same template and put it on each of the planets, which is absolutely awesome. Now I want to also kind of say like which are the inner planets and which are the outer planets. That's going to be a little bit different because that might change based on the planet itself, right? Because like each planet will have its own, whether it's inner or outer. So it looks like it's conditional. It's real simple. So what we're going to do is first we're going to show if the planet is an inner planet, we're going to actually indicate that. So we'll put P, and I guess we'll make it strong, all right? And then we'll say, here's the conditional part. So we're saying basically like, hey, like, if it's an inner planet, we'll go ahead and show that. If it's not, we'll show nothing. All right, so to do that, all we have to do is we're going to do a p tag. So actually, let's do this. Let's make it a little bit easier. We'll put inner planet here. And then inside the p tag, what we're going to do is, again, we have to do that star to let the computer know, hey, we're doing Angular. And we're going to do ng, because it's a directive. And we're going to do if. Okay, ngIf equals. Okay, what does ngIf mean? It means, hey, if this is like, if what the condition you put inside these quotes is true, then I'm going to go ahead and display it. If not, I won't. Right? So all we're going to do here is planet.isInnerPlanet. We need to add that to the model, actually. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I forgot to do that. Is inner planet Boolean. Okay, so that should be good. So notice how it wasn't in the interface, it broke. All right, so that is a good point. So again, if it's not in the interface here, because because planet, we know what it knows what its type is. So you gotta make sure that if you add stuff, it's gotta be part of the interface. So now, if it's an inner planet, it will show this interior part. If not, this will not be rendered to the screen. So let's go ahead and take a look. So notice how Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars show inner planet, but Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune do not. All right, so this is how we can do like conditional rendering. So maybe you want to show inner planet or show something on the screen based on some condition. So you can use the ngIf directive to do that. Now you're wondering, well, what happens if I want to show like inner planet and outer planet? Like maybe I want to do two separate things. All right, so we're going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to get rid of this line, okay? And we're going to basically do like an if-else kind of thing. We're going to use something called template. So I'm going to do angle bracket and then do ngTemplate. So what is ngTemplate? ngTemplate basically says, hey, I want this is going to be one little like mini template that you can conditionally display. I can also give this template an ID. All I have to do is use a hashtag. So hashtag inner template. Let's call it inner template. And inside this template, I'm going to go ahead and display a p tag. Let me do that a bit better. P. And then we'll do inner planet. And I guess we'll make it strong. Why not? We did it strong before. We'll make it strong here. Not strong. It's strong. So there we go. I'll move this over. All right, and then the next template will be, as you guessed it, the outer one. So ng template hash outer template, and then we'll do a p tag and a strong tag, and we'll do outer planet. All right, so that way we have these two different templates. Now we need to figure out, well, okay, Jonathan, how do we know which of these templates actually display to the screen? No problem. Before these two, I'm going to do ng container. So what the ng container is going to basically do is it's going to pick one of these templates and put it inside of it. So you think of the container like an empty box, and then Angular will pick which one of these templates to put inside this box. So again, we're still going to use ngIf equals, lowercase f, all right, and then we're going to put our condition in here. Here we're going to do planet, planet dot is inner planet, all right, so that is truth. Then what are we going to do? Then we're going to go ahead and do the inner template. Okay, then inner template. Else, outer template. All right, so this is an if else, right? So ngIf, so basically if this is true, then display the inner template. Else, display the outer template. So again, that's why I can think of like ng container like kind of like an empty box, right? And based on how this if statement is evaluated, whether or not inner planet is true or false, it will pick which template to actually display and put it to the screen. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So we saw the inner planets, and now for Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, we've got outer planet. All right, so now we can kind of add more things, more information, display dynamic data based on what kind of planet that we're working with. Okay, so this is way more interesting. All right, so now we've taken data and displayed it to the screen, so now we can loop through all the planets. And the way we did that was through a structural directive. Okay, this ngFor, which is star ngFor equals let planet of planets. So star ngFor means let's loop through an array of objects, and then for each object, display this template. Okay, planets, this variable here comes from the component. Let me go back to the component, right? Which is here, so that is what is bound to. And then here, we're just basically taking each planet and displaying its properties using these double curly braces. We also wanted to display inner planet or outer planet depending on which one the planet was. So because we have two options, we have two possibilities, I use a container and a template. I have one template for inner planets and one template for outer planets. Inside the template tag, I have the actual HTML I would like to display. I have a highlight here. Then I have an ng container, which the templates will go into based on whether or not the planet is an inner planet. Star ngIf equals planet.isInnerPlanet, then inner planet, else outer planet. All right, that way I was able to display inner versus outer planet depending on which one they were. These structural directives, ngIf and ngFor, are mega useful. All right, because that way we were able to display exactly what we want to the screen based on the data that we get. Because like I said, I don't know, like maybe there's going to be exoplanets that we find. Okay, or maybe we'll finally find Nibiru or Planet X and we'll add it to the solar system. All right, so we'll be able to handle any data that comes our way because we're using templating. Now, if you notice that this doesn't look that great, right? It's just basically text. It's kind of eh. Let's use some CSS and spice this up. All right, so our planet dashboard doesn't look so great right now. It's just like black and white. We've got our data, right, from the API showing, but it doesn't look so great. So we're going to have to actually use CSS to spruce this up a bit. So let's head over to our project and start doing some stuff. So the first thing I want to do is I don't like this font. I want to add a new font from the Google API. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to index.html, which is in the main folder. And what I've done is I've added this line called for Google API. So if you go over to the Google API, there is a font called Orbitron, which looks pretty cool. And we just got this line from Google API. They basically told us to paste this in. So index.html is actually the HTML file that your user is going to interact with. Remember, Angular is a single page application. What it's really doing is it's taking this one HTML file and switching stuff out depending on what component the user is currently viewing. So since that's the case, we get to put like Bootstrap or, Google APIs or like anything you need to like import is going to come into here. You also can change the title. I changed it to Planet Dashboard. And so if you're following along, you just go ahead and change that. And notice on line 12 that we have this app root. All right, this is it. This is the root app. This is basically what's going to be changing as we go from component to component. This will be switched out for whatever we want to show on the view. I also added some images. So if we go to this assets folder, the assets folder is where Angular expects static files to be held, like images, for example. It could be other things like PDFs or Excel files or whatever, what have you. What I did was I added a folder called images, and I put in some JPEGs of each of the planets plus a background. And so that will allow us to use these images later. If you're looking at the GitHub repo, you can go get these pictures for yourself. If you look inside, we've got, various pictures of different planets. All right, so this is where we're going to keep those images. And so now I kind of want to spruce up my component. So what you need to do is you're going to actually make changes to the CSS file. Now, the cool thing about Angular is that when we generated this component, it came with a CSS file. This CSS file only applies to this component. So even if you're showing multiple components on the screen, each component will have its own CSS file, so you can kind of like tweak each component without having to worry about it bleeding off into the other ones. And the reason this CSS file goes with this HTML file is if we go over to the component, you'll notice it says style URLs here. All right, see, that's where it points to that CSS file. So that's how that's how it knows to go here to get its styles. Now, I put some styles in here already. So if you're looking at the GitHub repo, you can follow along. I'm not going to go through the CSS. This is just normal CSS. There's nothing special about it. You don't have to do anything special with Angular. You can target things by ID. You can target things by class. You can use Flexbox and all the normal CSS stuff that is already available to you. I made the H1, H2 tags have Orbitron because I think it looks better. Planet row will be display flex. So I'm trying to have like 3 planets per row. I made the planet cards. You can play with the width and see how you like it. I added a little bit of a transformation, so when you hover over them, they'll like move a little bit. And then we're going to add an image to each card in a second. All right, so I'm going to change around the components a little bit. So I have Planet Dashboard here, so I'm going to go ahead and just put like Planet Row for the class. And then I'm going to add a class to this div tag. So that way everything inside of this div will have that, will have it applied. So it'll be class, I think I called it Planet Card. And again, you don't have to do anything special here. No hyphens, no special brackets, nothing. Okay, it's just like normal classes that you would use for HTML. Now I want to put the image beneath the name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do image source equals, and instead of doing like a string, I'm going to use the template that we've been doing. So what I'll do is planet.image URL. Right, so that will be able to go grab the image URL of the planet, and then as the alternate, in the case they can't read it, we will use planet.name. All right, couple little small things. I changed db.json to have that. So if we go back to db.json, I added an image URL. Now, key thing, put assets / images / and then the name of the planet. So I have assets here. So that way it knows to go to the assets folder to like get your image. All right. And again, assets is the whole point of having the assets folder is for stuff to go in there, like static files, like pictures of planets. All right. So that's what I did here, assets / images / and whatever the name is. And I also went to the model and I added the image URL as a string. All right. So that has to all kind of go together. You might have to restart Json-Server, but all you got to do is just basically go to the other terminal and then just close it out and start it again. No big deal. So what I did for that is, in case you have to like ever close this down, I hit Control-C to stop it. And then again, the command is Json-Server watch db.json, and that will restart it. All right, you don't really have to do that, but I just wanted to call it out in case you're having some sort of problem with it. All right, so image source equals, and then we just use the template. So we just basically planet.image URL, alt planet.name, and then we're going to add the class. Actually, we don't really need to. I think in my CSS, what I did was, I just basically said the image of the planet card will be a square of 150 by 150, object fit cover. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to apply a global style. So this planet-dashboard.component.css will only apply to this HTML file. Sometimes you want to apply CSS to the entire site. If you do, there is a styles.css file in the root. If we go here, and notice how it already has a comment saying you can add global styles to this file. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and I made some CSS already. I'm going to use that background.jpg. Notice since styles.css is in the root, we don't have to do anything special. It's just assets / images / background.jpg. Cover, no repeat, in the center fixed. All right, moment of truth. Let's see how our app looks. All right, awesome. We could use a little bit better text, so I'm going to go ahead and change the color. So what I did was I added color white to the H1 and H2 tags, and I added a new thing for P tags to make them white and to make them a little bit bigger. Also, I did change the box shadow to white. You can always adjust the CSS to however you'd like this to look. But if we go back, now we have our planet dashboard. So now we have a card for each one of our planets. It's got some fun facts and some information about each one. And if you hover over each one, it will do a little bit of an animation. And we've got our background. All right. So now we were able to grab data from the API, and we were able to loop through it and use CSS to make it all look better. So now you've got some basics of Angular. So from here, you can of course go ahead and customize this app however you'd like, but you can use this as a jumping off point. There's of course much more to learn about Angular, but for beginners, I think this is an excellent stepping off point to make something that looks kind of cool. Thanks for watching. By no means was this tutorial a 100% everything about Angular. In fact, it was really just meant to get something going pretty quickly so that you can understand the basic structure of an Angular app and get something that looked pretty cool so you would be inspired to learn more. There are plenty of other topics, including routing and different things you can do with Angular, but with this, I think you can get started and again, get inspired to learn more. This has been Coding Your Career. My name is Jonathan Hopp, and thank you very much for watching.